The silent suffering. In the early 2000s, after the United States led an invasion of Afghanistan, life for many Afghan civilians, especially women, became even more complicated. The arrival of foreign troops brought hope to some, but for many others, it led to suffering and devastation. One such woman was 26-year-old Zainab, whose life would be forever marked by the horrors of war and the actions of the foreign forces who came to her homeland. Zainab was born in a small village in the province of Khost, located in the southeastern part of Afghanistan. Her family was poor but proud, and Zainab had always been a strong-willed young woman. She had dreams of becoming a teacher and helping the young girls in her village get an education. However, the political unrest and constant violence that had plagued Afghanistan for decades made these dreams seem impossible. When the US-led invasion began in 2001, the village of Khost was caught in the crossfire. It was a region often targeted by airstrikes, as it was believed to be a stronghold for Taliban forces. Zainab's family, like many others, lived in constant fear, not only of the Taliban but of the foreign soldiers who were now patrolling the streets. Zainab's father, a farmer, did his best to protect his family, but the tension in the air was palpable. One fateful day in 2003, Zainab's life was shattered. The US military had received intelligence that insurgents were hiding in the nearby area, and they launched an operation to root them out. The operation was swift and brutal, with airstrikes and ground troops sweeping through the village. Zainab's family, along with many others, was caught in the chaos. Zainab had been in her home when the bombing began. The walls of their small mud house shook violently, and the sound of explosions filled the air. Her younger brother, who was only 8, was killed instantly. Zainab's mother was gravely injured, and Zainab herself was trapped under the rubble of their home. When the dust settled, Zainab managed to crawl out from beneath the debris, her body bruised and bloodied. She found her mother, who was barely conscious, and her brother's lifeless body. But her father was nowhere to be found. In the aftermath of the bombing, the village was left in ruins, with many homes destroyed and countless civilians injured or killed. Zainab was taken to a makeshift hospital by a group of Afghan soldiers who were patrolling the area. She was treated for her injuries, but her heart was broken. Her father had been killed in the bombing, and her family was torn apart. The pain of losing her family was compounded by the anger she felt towards the foreign troops who had caused the destruction. But the suffering did not end there. As the US military continued its operations in the region, the villagers of Khost were subjected to more raids and random detentions. Zainab, now alone and grieving, was caught in one such raid in 2004. The soldiers entered her home, accusing her of harboring Taliban sympathizers. They had no evidence, but they treated her with cruelty, suspecting every Afghan woman to be an enemy. Zainab was dragged from her home and taken to a detention facility. There she was interrogated, beaten, and humiliated. The soldiers demanded information about the Taliban, accusing her of being a collaborator. Zainab had no answers to give, but that didn't stop them from treating her like a criminal. She was forced to endure days of torment, her dignity stripped away in the name of security. After several days, Zainab was released, but the psychological scars would last a lifetime. She was returned to her village, now a shadow of its former self. The once vibrant community was now filled with grief, anger, and distrust. Zainab's mother had died from her injuries, and the loss of her family weighed heavily on her. But the trauma Zainab endured did not end with her release. The villagers were deeply divided, with some blaming the foreign troops for the destruction and others believing that the Taliban's presence had made them a target. Zainab's reputation in the village was also tainted. Many viewed her as a traitor, suspecting her of collaborating with the enemy simply because she had been detained by the soldiers. Zainab withdrew from the community, ashamed and broken. She no longer had the energy or the will to pursue her dreams of becoming a teacher. The war had taken everything from her, her family, her home, and her sense of identity. Yet, despite the overwhelming pain, she could not forget the faces of the other women and children who had suffered the same fate. In the years that followed, Zainab became a quiet symbol of the suffering that many Afghan women endured during the war. Her story was shared in whispers, a reminder of the brutal reality that civilians, especially women, faced during the US military operations. While the world moved on, Zainab remained in the shadows, haunted by the trauma of her past. Zainab's life was marked by a terrible irony. The foreign troops who came to her homeland, promising peace and stability, had brought only destruction. The very people who were meant to protect her and her family had become the source of her suffering. In the end, Zainab's story was not one of victory or hope, but of survival in the face of overwhelming odds. This story aims to reflect the harsh realities faced by many Afghan women during the US-led invasion and the subsequent military operations. It highlights the trauma, persecution, and suffering experienced by civilians, particularly women, caught in the crossfire of a conflict not of their making. As Zainab's story comes to a close, it leaves us with a profound question. How can we ensure that the voices of those who have suffered in silence are finally heard? Join us in our next video, where we explore the resilience of Afghan women who, despite unimaginable hardships, continue to fight for a brighter future. Their courage and determination will inspire us all. Don't miss it.